The night was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that presses against the ears until every heartbeat feels like a drum. A lone fire crackled in the heart of a canyon, casting tall shadows on the rock walls and sending sparks into the dark sky. The year was 1879, and the land was still wild, still untamed where the whispers of old tribes clung to the wind, and the soil remembered every drop of blood spilled upon it. She lay against the stone, her breath shallow, her hand pressed tight to the wound in her side. The fabric of her dress was torn, stained dark with blood, clinging to her skin as though even the cloth feared to let go. Her lips trembled, not just from pain, but from a dread that went deeper than the wound itself. Across from her, kneeling with the patience of one who had seen death before, but would not yet surrender to it, was an Apache warrior. His eyes did not waver, though the weight of her suffering was plain upon his brow. He held in his hands a bundle of burning sage, smoke curling upward like prayers to the unseen. The village nearby was no place of comfort. It was a settlement caught between two worlds, half belonging to the settlers who had come west with wagons and promises, half still claimed by the people whose ancestors had walked the land long before any map was drawn. Every soul who lived there knew that peace was as thin as glass. It could shatter with the wrong word, the wrong gesture, the wrong heart. She had not meant to stumble into this world. She had not meant to find herself lying in the dirt of the desert floor, bleeding, whispering for an end. Her journey had begun in the small wooden houses of the village, where the sound of horseshoes on hard-packed earth was as common as a church bell, and where every glance over the shoulder reminded her she did not belong as firmly as she hoped. She had been running from something no one yet knew what. Some said she carried a secret worth dying for. Others said she was cursed, marked by fate to bring ruin wherever her feet touched the ground. The Apache who knelt before her did not ask questions. His people were keepers of silence, listeners of truth that others overlooked. But as he pressed his hand close to her wound, she turned her face away, her voice low, broken, desperate. "Let me die." The words carried no fear, only resignation, as though the weight she bore was heavier than any mercy his healing could give. But something in her words struck him. His dark eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in recognition. She was not speaking of the wound that cut into her flesh. She spoke of something else, something unseen, a truth buried deeper than her blood. He could hear it in the way her breath shuddered, in the way her fingers clutched at the earth as if she longed to sink beneath it. And for the first time that night, he knew this was not just a rescue. This was a crossing, a meeting between two lives tied by a thread neither had chosen. Outside the canyon, the world carried on. In the village, men played cards under lantern light. Women drew water from the well, children chased each other through the dusty lanes. Yet beneath it all lingered whispers of fear of hunger, fear of the unknown future that pressed upon the frontier like a storm on the horizon. And in the silence of that canyon, with firelight flickering against their faces, the weight of two worlds balanced on the edge of a single moment. He could have walked away. He could have left her to the fate she begged for. But as he studied her trembling lips and the wound that refused to close, something deeper than duty held him in place. There was truth buried within her pain, truth she carried in silence, truth that could not remain hidden forever. He did not know it yet. But the secret she bore would change more than just her life. It would shake the very ground of the village, stir the ghosts of the old tribes, and test the fragile threads of peace that hung by a breath. The sage burned lower, its smoke curling like questions into the night. She kept her eyes closed, her hand over her chest, as if holding herself together before she came apart entirely. He leaned closer, listening not to her words, but to the silence between them. For in that silence was something she had not yet spoken, something she could not yet bear to confess. The fire hissed as a log broke apart, scattering sparks. The canyon walls seemed to lean in, pressing them closer together in a chamber of fate. He reached for the knife at his belt not to harm her, but to prepare what must come next. She flinched, though her strength was failing. Her lips moved again, weaker this time, a whisper trembling with the last of her will. "Let me die." But he did not draw back. He saw it now, faint but certain, the mark on her side. Hidden beneath the torn fabric, a scar not born of this night but of something older. It was not just a wound. It was a story carved into her flesh. A story she carried whether she wished it or not. And in that moment, with her life hanging in the balance, he knew the truth was not hers alone. It belonged to the land, to the village, to every soul that would soon be forced to reckon with it. The night held its breath. The fire whispered low. The canyon grew darker, save for the small flame flickering between them. She would not yet tell him the truth, but he had already found enough to know this was no ordinary wound, no ordinary woman, and no ordinary night. And so, as the smoke rose into the endless desert sky, a new question began to burn, one that neither of them could answer yet. What secret was so heavy that death itself seemed lighter than carrying it? The answer would come, but not tonight. Tonight, there was only fire, silence, and the truth waiting just beyond her final breath. The night dragged on, but time inside the canyon felt as though it had stopped. The air carried the dry scent of dust and smoke, the kind that clung to the skin and never left. The Apache's hands moved with quiet steadiness, gathering herbs from a leather pouch he carried at his side. He crushed them between his palms, letting the oils seep into the fire as if calling upon the spirits of the desert to give strength to the dying girl before him. Yet even as he worked, her breathing grew weaker, her lips pale and trembling, her eyes struggling to remain open. She wanted to surrender, to let go of whatever had brought her here, but something in her face told another story. Like a candle trying to fight the wind, even though the flame was already too thin to hold. The Apache saw it, though she tried to hide it. He saw more than just a wound. He saw fear layered beneath grief, and grief layered beneath something else, something she guarded even from herself. In the village beyond the ridge, whispers had already begun to spread. People noticed when a stranger wandered into their midst, especially a woman who carried no husband at her side, no family name tied to her. She had appeared weeks ago, stepping down from a weary horse at the edge of the trading post, her clothes dirt-stained, her eyes sharp but tired. Some said she was running from bandits. Others swore she had been seen before, years earlier, though she would not speak of it. Children watched her with wide eyes as she moved through the dusty street, and mothers pulled their little ones closer, uncertain if her presence was blessing or curse. The blacksmith had been the first to offer her a roof for a night. Though she never spoke much to him, she paid with silver that seemed too polished, too fine for the frontier, and no one could agree on where it came from. Each day she lingered, the tension grew heavier, though no one dared ask her the truth. Then came the night she disappeared from her small room above the smith's shop, only to be found later bleeding in the desert, her body torn, as though she had crossed paths with something or someone who meant to end. Her, the Apache warrior, had found her there, not by accident. His people had always watched the settlers from the shadows, guarding their land even as the villages grew where old hunting trails once lay. He had seen her once before from a distance, standing apart from the rest, her face turned toward the horizon as though listening to something the others could not hear. Something about her had unsettled him then, though he could not name it. Tonight, when he discovered her blood soaking the earth, the unease sharpened into something deeper, something that told him her fate was tied not just to herself but to everyone who lived on this contested land. The smoke of the herbs curled around her face, and she coughed faintly, her eyes flicking open. She did not thank him, did not plead again for death, but the look she gave him was heavy enough to silence any words he might have spoken. It was a look of someone carrying more than a wound, someone carrying memory. He wanted to ask her name, but the desert had taught him that silence often revealed more than questions. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called. The canyon echoed the sound, stretching it until it felt like the voices of ghosts drifting between stone walls. She shivered at the sound, though the night air was not cold. Her hand moved instinctively to her side, fingers trembling against the blood-soaked cloth. "I can't go back," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The Apache tilted his head slightly, his gaze fixed on her face. Her voice was cracked, raw, yet the words carried weight. "Ouch," She had not said she would not go back. She said she couldn't, and that made all the difference. He pressed the herbs gently against her wound. She winced but did not resist. Her eyes closed again, and for a moment he thought she had slipped into unconsciousness. But then her lips parted once more, speaking words that were barely louder than the fire's crackle. "They'll find me if I return. And if they do, the whole village will suffer." The warrior's jaw tightened. He did not ask who they were. He did not need to not yet. He only understood that her fear was not for herself alone, but for the fragile lives of those who would have no chance to defend themselves. The memory of his own people flickered in his mind, the raids, the broken treaties, the graves left behind when soldiers swept through their camps. He knew what it was to carry the weight of survival, to live each day in the shadow of a threat no one else could see until it was too late. And now he understood that the stranger before him carried that same shadow. The fire burned lower. The canyon fell deeper into silence, save for her ragged breathing. Still, he did not move. He sat watchful, his back straight, his hand resting near the hilt of his blade, though his eyes remained on her. She stirred in her uneasy rest, her face shifting with the ghosts of whatever memory haunted her. Once she whispered something in her sleep words he did not recognize, though they carried the rhythm of a prayer. He did not know how long the night stretched. But when the first pale light of dawn crept across the canyon walls, her breathing steadied. Her lips parted once more, though her eyes remained closed. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she murmured. The Apache leaned closer, his brow furrowed. But before he could ask what she meant, she grew still again, slipping into a silence deeper than sleep. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of fire. The warrior knew he could not remain hidden here much longer. The settlers would wake, the village would stir, and soon questions would rise about the missing woman who had left her bed behind. If they found her in his care, they would not see mercy in his actions. They would see only the old enemy, the threat they had always been told to fear. Yet leaving her was not an option. Not now. He rose to his feet, standing tall against the dawn. His eyes swept the canyon once more before lowering to her fragile form. There was more here than a wound, more than a passing mystery. She carried something the desert itself seemed to recognize, something that tied her to the land in ways neither the settlers nor his own people could yet understand. As he bent to lift her gently, her eyes flickered open once more. For the first time, he saw not just pain, not just fear, but defiance thin as a thread, but strong enough to cut through the weakness of her body. Her voice was no more than a breath, but it carried with it the promise of something yet unseen. "They don't know what I know." And with that, she fell back into silence. The Apache tightened his grip on her, his mind heavy with questions he could not yet ask. He turned toward the path that would lead him away from the canyon, away from the eyes of both village and tribe, carrying her weight as though it were not just her life, but a burden meant for him as well. The desert wind stirred, carrying with it the faintest whisper of something distant. He could not tell if it was a warning or a blessing. But he knew one thing with certainty: the truth she carried was not meant to die with her, and soon, whether she wished it or not, it would rise to the surface, threatening to change everything. The desert morning was a cruel one, the kind that burned the eyes with light even before the air turned hot. The Apache carried her across uneven stone, his steps measured, steady, but the weight of the woman pressed heavy against his chest. She was lighter than he expected, as though the blood she had lost had already stolen too much of her. Yet it wasn't her body that weighed on him. It was the words she had spoken in the night, words that clung to him like thorns. "They don't know what I know." As the sun climbed, he kept to the shadows where the cliffs offered cover. His people had ways of moving unseen, ways that settlers would never learn, and he used them now. If the village found him with her, suspicion would turn to anger, and anger to violence. The land between their two worlds was dry kindling, and one spark could set it ablaze. When he reached a narrow hollow cut into the stone, he laid her gently on the ground. She stirred, her face pale, lips cracked from thirst. He gave her water from a small pouch, and she drank with trembling hands. For a long moment, she did not look at him, as if ashamed of needing his help. But when her eyes finally met his, there was something sharper there. "You shouldn't have saved me," she whispered. The Apache said nothing, though his gaze did not waver. He had heard such words before from warriors who longed for death in battle, from mothers who buried their children and no longer wished to rise with the sun. But her tone was different. It wasn't despair alone that drove her plea. It was fear, and fear was always tied to truth. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the wind curling through the hollow. Finally she spoke again, her voice low, heavy with something unspoken. "They will come looking."
I'm not for me. I'm not for what I carry.
He studied her, his brow furrowed. She did not explain further, and he did not press. Among his people, truths revealed themselves in their own time. But he understood now that whatever hunted her was not finished. The wound in her side was only the beginning of something larger. In the village, whispers had already begun. By midday, men gathered near the trading post, uneasy at her absence. Some claimed she had fled into the desert on her own. Others muttered that she had been taken. Suspicion always found a voice, and by the second hour, those voices turned toward the Apache. Though few dared to speak it aloud, the thought spread quick as fire in dry grass. She was gone. Surely one of his kind had something to do with it. At the same time, deeper in the hills, another group stirred. Not settlers, not tribesmen, but men who traveled the borderlands like shadows. They were neither lawful nor loyal, their allegiance only to coin and to the secrets they could sell. One of them carried a scar across his jaw, a scar the woman knew well. They had tracked her before, and though she had slipped away, they had not forgotten. For them, her survival meant unfinished business. And unfinished business always came with a price. Back in the hollow, the Apache prepared a poultice of herbs, pressing it carefully against her wound. She winced, but did not cry out. Remained fixed on the stone ceiling above, as if afraid to look directly at him. "You don't understand," she said at last. "If they find me, if they find what I kept hidden, none of us will be safe. Not the settlers, not your people, not anyone." His voice was low, steady. "What do you carry?" Her lips pressed together, her breath shallow. "Something taken. Something they want back. Something that should never have left their hands." The weight of her words settled between them. He did not ask more, though his mind turned. He thought of the times soldiers had raided his people, carrying away sacred items, pieces of the past that bound them to their ancestors. He thought of the rage it stirred, the blood that was spilled for the sake of memory. Perhaps her burden was not so different. Still, her secrecy was dangerous. The longer she withheld it, the greater the threat became not just to her, but to everyone who lived in the shadow of this desert. That night, as darkness returned, another fire burned not in the canyon, but in the heart of the village. The preacher stood before the gathered crowd, his voice sharp, warning of curses that came when strangers brought secrets into their midst. He spoke of sin, of punishment, of God's wrath waiting for those who turned a blind eye. The settlers listened, their fear growing with each word, until suspicion hardened into certainty. If the woman did not return, if she was not found, then perhaps the Apache had taken her as an offering, or worse, as revenge. The fragile peace trembled, one wrong step from shattering, in the hills. The scarred man and his companions moved closer, their eyes sharp as they searched the land. They knew she could not have gone far, not with the wound she bore, and they knew the desert well enough to find what it tried to hide. Back in the hollow, the Apache kept watch while she slept. The firelight flickered across his face, shadows deepening the lines of worry etched there. He thought of his people, of the oaths he had sworn to protect them, and of the strange fate that placed this woman in his care. She carried danger with her, danger that would come for them all. Yet leaving her now would be no different than placing a blade in her heart near midnight. She woke with a start, her hand reaching instinctively for her side. Her eyes darted toward him, filled with fear. But when she saw his stillness, she exhaled shakily. "I was not supposed to survive that night," she whispered. He waited. Saying nothing, "They came for me already. I thought I had hidden it well enough, but they knew. They always know. I escaped, but not clean. They'll follow until I'm caught, and when they catch me, they'll tear apart anyone who stood in their way." Her voice cracked then, and for the first time, he saw her eyes glisten with tears. She turned her face away, ashamed. The Apache's gaze did not soften, but neither did it harden. "Then we must keep them from finding you." She shook her head. "You don't understand. It isn't only about me. If they find what I hid, it will not matter who I am or where I run. They will come for the village, for the land, for anything in their path. And when they do, there will be no stopping them." Her words lingered in the air, heavy as the smoke of the fire. He did not press her further, though his mind churned. She spoke of enemies that would not stop, of something hidden that could draw death upon all of them. And though she did not say it outright, he began to wonder if her secret was not only a burden, but a weapon, something that could destroy just as easily as it could protect. Outside, the desert wind rose, carrying with it a faint, echo-distant hooves. Too many to belong to a lone rider? He listened, his body tensing. And in that moment, he knew their time hidden in the hollow was running out. The woman's eyes widened as if she heard it too, and her lips parted but no words came. Instead, her hand tightened around the fabric of her dress, clutching it close to her wound, her breath shallow with both pain and dread. The Apache reached for his blade, his eyes fixed on the dark beyond the firelight. He did not yet know who hunted them, the settlers with their fear, or the scarred man with his vengeance, but he knew they were no longer alone in the night. And as the sound of hooves grew nearer, the truth she carried pressed heavier upon them both, waiting to be revealed in a way neither was ready to face. The sound of hooves echoed faintly at first, a distant rhythm carried on the desert wind. But as the minutes stretched, it grew sharper, closer, until it filled the hollow with a warning that neither of them could ignore. The Apache rose to his feet, every muscle tense, his eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the firelight. The woman struggled to sit up, her hand pressed against her side, her breath ragged. She knew that sound too well. "They found us," she whispered. The Apache did not answer. His silence was enough. He doused the small fire with a sweep of sand and turned to her, kneeling so his eyes met hers. For the first time since he had carried her into this place, she saw uncertainty in his face. Not fear. He was not a man who feared battle, but the heavy weight of knowing the fight ahead could not be won without cost. "We must move," he said quietly. She tried to rise, but her legs gave way beneath her. He caught her before she fell, lifting her again with a strength that seemed endless. Her head rested against his shoulder, her breath shallow, but her eyes stayed open, straining toward the darkness. "They won't stop," she murmured. "Not until they have it." The Apache's jaw tightened. He still did not know what it was, but the urgency in her voice carried a truth too sharp to dismiss. He shifted her weight, then stepped out into the desert night, moving quickly along the narrow paths carved between stone walls. Behind them, the riders drew closer. Their voices carried now, harsh and eager, men calling to one another as they closed in. The scarred man led them, his voice the loudest, promising reward for the capture, punishment for any who failed. The woman trembled at the sound, her hand gripping the Apache's shoulder with desperate strength. "If he finds me, everything ends." The warrior did not slow. His strides carried them through twisting canyons, across ridges where the moonlight painted the rocks in silver. Yet no matter how swift his pace, the riders pressed closer, their torches flickering in the distance like hunting flames. Far away, the village stirred uneasily. Word had reached them that riders were near, strangers armed and restless. Fear gripped the settlers, and the preacher's voice rang out again, declaring the events as judgment. Some villagers argued to bar their doors, others whispered of taking up arms. But beneath it all lay the same fear, that the Apache and the missing woman were the cause, and that the riders brought ruin with them. The blacksmith, who had once given her shelter, stood apart from the others. He remembered the look in her eyes when she first arrived, the way she carried herself, like someone who had lived too many lives already. He did not believe she was a curse, but he could not deny that trouble followed her. Now, as torches burned on the horizon, He wondered if the village could survive what was coming. In the hills, the Apache finally slowed, his sharp eyes catching the faint glow of torchlight closing in from three sides. The riders had spread their net wide, cutting off escape. He ducked into the shadow of a jagged outcrop, laying her gently against the stone. "They're circling us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They know how to hunt." He crouched beside her, his eyes scanning the darkness. His people had hunted the same way for generations, driving prey into narrow spaces where there was no way out. These men were no strangers to the land. They had learned from it, stolen from it, and now used it for their own. The woman's breath quickened. Her wound burned, but it was not pain alone that shook her. She knew the scarred man would not simply kill her. He wanted what she carried, and he would tear apart everything in his path to claim it. Her hand moved slowly to her dress, feeling for the hidden pouch sewn into the lining. Inside, the object pressed cold against her skin, small yet heavy, a weight that seemed far larger than its size. She closed her eyes, remembering the night she had taken it, the blood that had already been spilled for it, in the faces of those she could not save. The Apache's gaze shifted to her hand, though she tried to hide it. He saw the way she guarded that place, the way her body tensed, as though afraid he might discover it. He said nothing, but the pieces in his mind began to form. The sound of hooves grew louder. Torchlight danced across the rocks. The riders were closing in, their shouts bouncing off the canyon walls. The Apache knew they would find this hollow soon. He reached for his blade, his hands steady, though his heart carried the weight of two worlds. The duty to his people and the burden of this, a stranger who had drawn death to his land. The woman's eyes widened, as the glow of torches painted the walls around them. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If they take it, they'll come for everything. The land, the villages, your people. None of it will matter. They'll burn it all to the ground." The Apache's gaze flicked toward her, his expression unreadable. He did not ask what it was. He only knew that her words carried truth, and that tonight the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Waiting for blood? The first rider's shadow stretched across the stone, torchlight flickering as he dismounted. Others followed, their boots striking hard against the earth, their rifles catching the glow of fire. The scarred man's voice cut through the night, cold and certain. "She's here. Find her." The woman's hand trembled against her dress, her eyes locked on the Apache. For the first time, she seemed ready to speak, ready to tell him the truth of what she carried. But the words stuck in her throat, trapped between fear and the knowledge that once spoken, they could never be taken back. The Apache crouched lower, his hand gripping the hilt of his blade as the riders spread through the canyon. The night was thick with smoke and torchlight, the air sharp with the smell of sweat and iron. Every sound echoed the scrape of boots on stone, the clatter of metal, the sharp breath of men eager for the hunt's end. The woman's pulse raced, her body trembling not only from pain but from the weight of the moment. She could feel the world closing in, the net tightening, the inevitability of being caught. And yet beneath it all, a thread of defiance burned within her, refusal to let the scarred man take what he sought. The Apache shifted slightly, his body a shield between her and the approaching men. His eyes narrowed, his breath steady, though inside he felt the pull of countless choices fight. Flee or surrender to fate. The riders drew closer, their torches flaring, shadows dancing across the canyon walls. The scarred man's laughter echoed, low and cruel, as he called into the hollow. "Come now, girl. You know this ends tonight." The woman's eyes closed briefly, her lips moving in a whisper the Apache could not hear. When she opened them again, the firelight caught something sharp in her gaze. The canyon fell through the fear. The canyon fell silent for a breath, silence so deep it seemed the desert itself was waiting. The riders were only steps away, their torches casting light into the hollow. The scarred man's boots struck the stone, slow and deliberate, as he stepped forward to claim what he believed was his. And in that breath, suspended between darkness and fire, every thread of conflict tightened to its breaking point. Holding the night in a grip that promised the world was about to shatter, The scarred man stepped deeper into the hollow, his torchlight cutting through the shadows. His men fanned out behind him, rifles raised, their eyes glinting with greed and certainty. The Apache stood unmoving, his body shielding the woman, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. The desert night seemed to press close around them, heavy with silence, heavy with waiting. The woman's heart pounded against her ribs, her breath shallow with fear and pain. She knew there was no more time to hide, no more chance to run. Her secret weighed against her side, burning like fire, and she felt the Apache's steady presence beside her. For the first time since she had fled into the desert, she realized she was no longer carrying this burden alone. The scarred man's voice cut the stillness. "You can't hide forever. Give me what's mine. I might let you live long enough to regret stealing it." The woman pushed herself weakly against the stone, her hand trembling as it slipped into the hidden pouch of her dress. The Apache glanced at her, but did not stop her. He only stood taller, his dark eyes never leaving the men before him. When her hand emerged, she held a small object wrapped in cloth. Her fingers shook as she pulled the fabric away, revealing a glint of Metallan amulet. Old and weathered, its surface carved with symbols older than the settlers, older even than the Apache's people. The torchlight caught its edges, casting strange shapes against the canyon walls. The scarred man's eyes widened. "There it is," he hissed. "You don't even know what you hold." The Apache's gaze lingered on the amulet, his face unreadable, but inside him stirred the weight of memory. He had seen such markings before, etched into the sacred places of his people, tied to stories whispered only by the elders. This was not a trinket of gold or silver. It was something far deeper, something that belonged to the land itself. The woman's voice trembled, but her words carried strength. "It was never yours. You killed for it, burned for it, and thought no one would stop you. But I saw what you did. I took it so you couldn't use it." The scarred man's laugh was sharp, bitter. "You think you've saved anyone? That piece of metal is power. The kind that bends men to your will, that breaks villages without a bullet fired. You've wasted time running, but tonight it returns to the hands it belongs to." He stepped closer. But the Apache moved forward too, his blade gleaming faintly in the firelight. The riders hesitated, caught between their leader's command and the presence of a man they knew would not yield easily. The scarred man sneered, his scar pulling tight across his jaw. "You'd fight for her?" He spat. "For a settler's cast off carrying a curse. She'll doom you too." The Apache's voice was calm, but it cut through the canyon like stone breaking. "She carries what was taken. It does not belong to you. It belongs to the earth." The tension snapped in that moment. The scarred man raised his hand, signaling his men. Rifles lifted, torches flared, and chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked against the canyon walls, sparks of fire raining across the stone. The Apache moved with the speed of a hawk, his blade flashing, striking down the first man who lunged. The woman pressed herself flat against the rock, clutching the amulet to her chest as the clash raged around her. The scarred man charged forward, his rifle swinging like a club. The Apache blocked the blow, steel ringing against steel, their faces only inches apart. The scarred man's eyes burned with greed, with rage, with something darker than either. He struck again and again, but the Apache held his ground, strength unyielding. Meanwhile, the woman's vision blurred with pain, but her mind was clear. She knew this was the moment, the turning point. If the scarred man took the amulet, everything she had endured would be for nothing. She pushed herself to her knees, forcing her body to move, though it screamed in protest. The fight grew brutal. The Apache's blade cut across the scarred man's arm, drawing blood, but the man only roared, striking harder, his fury endless. Around them, riders fell, the clash echoing across the desert. Torches dropped, flames spreading along the sand, smoke rising like a signal to the village far below. At last, the scarred man managed to shove the Apache back, his hand reaching for the woman. His fingers stretched toward the amulet clutched to her chest, his breath ragged with triumph. But before he could seize it, the Apache lunged, driving him away with a strike that sent his rifle clattering against the stone. The woman met the Apache's eyes then. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent again, as though waiting for her choice. She gripped the amulet tightly, her voice hoarse but steady. "This doesn't belong to any of us. Not to him, not to me, not even to you." She raised the amulet high and hurled it against the stone wall. It shattered with a sound that was not just metal breaking, but something deeper, like the earth itself exhaling after being bound too long. The canyon filled with a rush of wind, scattering the flames, sending shadows twisting across the stone. The riders froze, fear flashing in their eyes. The scarred man fell to his knees, his face twisted in disbelief, his hands clawing at the shards scattered across the ground. "No, no, you fool. You've destroyed it." The Apache stood over him, blade ready, but he did not strike. The scarred man's power was gone, stripped away with the amulet's breaking. His men wavered, their courage faltering, until one by one they dropped their weapons and fled into the desert night. Only the scarred man remained, rage boiling over into madness. He lunged once more, but the Apache met him with a final, decisive blow that sent him sprawling into the dust. He lay still, the firelight dimming in his eyes. The woman collapsed back against the stone, her body trembling with both pain and relief. The Apache knelt beside her, his hand steady as he checked her wound. She met his gaze, tears tracing down her face. But for the first time, her expression held peace. "It's over," she whispered. He did not speak, but his silence carried the truth. The amulet was gone, its power shattered. The threat had ended here, in this hollow, though its shadow would linger in memory. When dawn came, the village stirred to find smoke rising faintly from the canyon. The blacksmith and others ventured out, wary of what they would find. They discovered the woman, weak but alive, and the Apache beside her, silent as stone. Word spread quickly of the battle of the riders who had fled, of the scarred man who would trouble them no more. Some villagers looked upon the woman with suspicion still, but others saw her sacrifice and understood. The preacher's voice faltered when faced with the truth of what she had endured, though his eyes still held doubt. The blacksmith, however, carried her back into the village with care. Refusing to let fear erase her humanity, the Apache returned to his people, but the memory of that night stayed with him. He knew the land had been scarred once more by greed, but he also knew the bond forged in that hollow would not be forgotten. The woman had chosen to destroy the power she could have claimed, and in doing so, she had saved not just herself but many. As weeks passed, her strength returned. She worked quietly in the village, avoiding the center of gossip, but slowly finding her place among those willing to see past rumor. The blacksmith remained her closest ally, though at night, when the desert winds rose, she often thought of the Apache watching the horizon somewhere beyond the ridges in time. The story of the amulet faded into whispers, half believed by those who had not seen it with their own eyes. But for the woman, it was no myth. It was a reminder of the cost of power, of the greed that burned men hollow, and of the strength found in sacrifice. The desert held many secrets, some buried, some broken, some carried in silence. She had learned that survival was not only about holding on, but about knowing what to let go. And as the seasons changed, she walked forward with that knowledge, her heart lighter than it had ever been. The Apache, though distant, carried the same memory. He had seen her courage, her defiance, and he knew that even in a land divided by fear and mistrust, there could still be moments where strangers stood together and chose what was right over what was easy. The canyon where the amulet was shattered grew quiet again, the wind sweeping away the last traces of fire. The earth had reclaimed what was stolen, and the desert, vast and eternal, moved on. The story of that night lived only in the hearts of those who survived it. A reminder that sometimes the heaviest burdens are carried not for oneself, but for all who come after. And in that truth, there was peace.